Welcome to this short story video, and it is about The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. But before we begin, I want you to make some predictions. Now, just looking at these images and book covers, what do you think the story could be about? What do you think the plot might be? What about the characters? Who might the characters be? What are their motivations? Can you interpret the tone of the story and the genre of the story just looking at these? What about symbols? Any symbols jump out to you from these pictures? Or perhaps the setting? Where and when do you think the setting might be? Make your predictions and please let me know in the comments. So first, before we read, we need to look at the context as we always do. And here's our man, Edgar Allan Poe. He is the author. Now, it was written by Edgar Allan Poe in 1843, and Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809. However, both of his parents died when he was young. He was only 2 years old when both of his parents died, and in fact, when his mum died, he was left overnight with her dead body, her corpse, and his younger sister, until they were found the next day by an adult. This obviously shaped him as he went on to write very grim Gothic pieces. He was also reported to have depression and be a heavy drinker. Now also, the 19th century, short stories became increasingly popular. Short stories are just stories that you can read in one sitting, and they really tell you a lot about human nature. Many were published in newspapers and magazines at the time. We also need to look at American Gothic or Dark Romanticism. Now, before this, Gothic literature was emerging and becoming popular in the 18th century in Europe. One example is the Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, and they had a focus on the past, gloomy settings like castles, featured the supernatural and monsters, and had intense emotions and romance. Romance was a big piece of Gothic, is what set it apart from horror. Here are just a few images to help you understand there. You can see a monster carrying a damsel in distress. There's your dark, gloomy castles and your settings. But by the 19th century, Poe and other writers were reinventing this genre. They were known as the Dark Romantics. Now, at the time, there was a literary movement called Transcendentalism or New Romanticism in America. Like other romantic movements, there was a focus on nature. Nature was this positive, beautiful thing. There was a goal of sort of self-reliance, being these self-made people wanting to move back to nature. However, dark romantics were a lot more pessimistic. They saw nature as being something that was powerful but dark. And American Gothicism focused on urban settings, insanity, and like I say, shows nature as deeply dark but powerful. And it differed a lot to other writers at the time who would write stories of, these heroes moving back to nature and becoming self-reliant people, overcoming odds. Instead, Poe and other authors focused on supernatural, gloomy sort of stories. And there were less monsters and more unexplainable supernatural events. So The Telltale Heart is an example of a dark romantic piece or American Gothic piece. Let me know why. What characteristics in this story can you see which are prevalent in this genre? There we go, insanity and a more urban setting. Now, when you read The Telltale Heart, I want you to focus on a few things. I want you first to try and spot Poe's message. What themes can you see in the novel? Also, how is the setting described? What's the tone used? How does it help characterize the novel as dark romantic or American Gothic? What symbology can you spot? Specifically, pay close attention to the heartbeat and the eye. That'll make more sense as you read. And what effect does the first person point of view have? Do you trust the narrator? So these are the things I want you to focus on as you read. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.
It's late. Time for your story, I think. My name is Christopher Lee, and these are Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic tales. true. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing, acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. It was his eye. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. You should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. Then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Oh, would a madman have been so wise as this? When my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern, cautiously, oh, so cautiously, cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. His room was as black as pitch, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's up there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. I knew that he'd been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He'd been saying to himself, "Oh, it's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Oh, yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I'd waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple, dim ray, like the thread of the spider, fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot.
So immediately in the Telltale Heart, we can see that it is written in a first-person point of view. The narrator tries to tell us that they're not crazy. They spend the entirety of the story really trying to reassure us that they are in fact sane. Now we don't know if the narrator is a man or a woman, it doesn't say, but they do say that they have a disease that actually sharpens their senses. They can hear so much more, so much so that they hear everything in heaven, hell and on earth. They continue to say, I'm not mad though. Listen to me, I'm actually not mad. How can you say I'm mad? I'm going to tell you my story so calmly that you'll believe I'm not mad. Now, they're going to tell the story, obviously, of a terrible thing that they've done, but because they tell it in such a way, because they tell it calmly, they think it makes them sane. How does that characterize them? Then they talk about this idea that entered their brain and it haunts them. This idea is personified. And basically, an old man lives with this person, with the narrator. The narrator probably rents a room in their house, and the old man is a tenant. They're not a family member, they're not related. And the old man has cataracts. It's a disease that makes the eye go a little bit blind, and it has a film that looks like that. And it's compared to the eye of a vulture. Now, think about vultures. What do vultures sort of symbolize? They often symbolize death. Also, this eye is described as an evil eye. It's even given capital letters here. Now, the evil eye is a really old curse in mythology. This image here is to ward off the evil eye. I'm not sure if any of you have seen this before. So perhaps this evil eye is a curse. Some people like to think that the evil eye is an all-knowing eye. The narrator sees it as an all-knowing eye, and therefore if it's all-knowing, he knows, the all-knowing eye knows that the narrator is crazy, so he wants rid of it. And some interpretations are in fact that the narrator is a woman and sees this eye as a dirty old man watching her, and she wants rid of it and wants to liberate women in some way. So what do you think? They then go on to say, like, madmen are crazy, they know nothing, but you should see me, I acted so cautiously, calmly, I did what I did in such a calm way, which makes him sound even more crazy, or makes the narrator sound even more crazy. He uses words like, I acted cunningly, with caution, and he laughs. He says this a lot. There's even onomatopoeic sounds like ha. Would a madman be so wise to do this? Again, that repetition of cautiously, oh so cautiously. Now, I don't know if any of you noticed a lot of the repetition in this story, and I'll talk about that now. There is what I just said, cautiously, oh so cautiously, cautiously. On the other side of the page, you can see little, a very, very little, or open, wide open. What does this sound like? It actually has a rhythmic beat. Think about it. Cautiously, oh so cautiously, cautiously, a little, a very, very little, open, wide open. It has a very rhythmic beat to it, and there is an important reason for that. Anyway, he stalks this old man. He actually goes in his room every night at midnight, super calmly, super quietly, and he stalks him like a predator would its prey. And he watches him for 7 nights without making a sound around midnight. And then on the 8th night, the montage changes. You know, we've got this for 7 nights, I did this, and then a new paragraph upon the 8th night, so we know something's going to change here. And he begins that, I watch his hand moves more quickly than mine did, this hyperbole, which makes him sound oh so powerful. And he even says, I felt the extent of my powers. He chuckles at what he's doing. He's laughing at it. He's trying to tell us, or she's trying to tell us, we don't know. The narrator's trying to tell us that they're not crazy, and yet they're doing this thing with such calm and stillness, and they're laughing at it. Clearly they are a bit mad. Now you may think that I drew back, but no, they went in. And there's a bit of irony here. They talk about the shutters. The windows were shut. The window shutters were closed. For the shutters were closed fastened through fear of robbers. And it's a bit of irony there, because it's not the robbers the old man should be fearing, but the person from whom he rents the house. Again, more showing off his powers here. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. Hyperbole again, showing the extent of his powers. Then we've got some alliteration here, deepening with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. So we've got that duh, duh, duh. Again, think about the rhythmic sounds we're getting in this story. Duh, duh, duh. Little by little, open, wide, wide open. You know, we've got a lot of rhythm here, and we've got that duh, duh, duh sound that adds to this. Why do you think that might be? I know what the old man felt. Again, I chuckled at heart. The narrator's laughing at this. He then characterises death. We could see that with a capital letter, as he stalks and calls him a victim, calls the old man a victim. Again, like a thread of a spider shot when talking about the ray of light coming from the lantern he's holding. I like this idea of a spider shot. I'm glad they used this imagery, because honestly, it kind of feels like the narrator is a spider with its prey in their nest and they're about to consume them. Let me know what you think about this analysis, guys. Let me know if you have any more interpretations.
Had I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased by fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say. Louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I've told you that I am nervous. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart was burst. New anxiety seized me. The sounds would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was Stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe to you the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. When I had made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. I talked freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued, and became, the ringing became more distinct, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Louder. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart! This is Christopher Lee, wishing you a very good night.
Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic Tales are a unique production for BBC Radio 2.
Wow, so what do you think of the protagonist in this story? Interesting end. So I'll start on the left side of the page. We see that he is hearing the sound of the old man's heart. They use the term such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. That's important because it is repeated again. So at this point the old man is still alive. He says it was the beating of the old man's heart, and the narrator says, "It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage." So the narrator is likening himself to a soldier who's dutiful, has a duty to fulfill, and is in some sense a hero, which is quite interesting. But yet the narrator still keeps still, scarcely breathed, motionless. The narrator refers to himself as clever and cunning. Again, the narrator is trying to convince you and persuade you that he's not crazy because he can act so calmly. Also, we see a lot of this quicker and quicker and louder and louder. Louder. Now, again, as I said on the other page, it's rhythmic. What is the rhythmic sound? What does it intend to mimic, do you think? To me, it sounds like a heartbeat, and that's obviously important given the story. Then again, they say a dreadful silence of that old house. So negative connotations, the word dreadful, talking about the silence. So strange a noise as this excited me to an uncontrollable terror. That dead silence at the dead hour of the night. The metaphor there actually excites the narrator. And then he kills the man. He pulls the bed over him. He smiles as he does it, or she does it, and the deed is done. The old man is dead. The narrator has killed the old man. He ceases to exist. The man's dead. And then the narrator says, "If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body." So if you think I'm crazy still, well, I'm going to prove you wrong in a minute by telling you how I cut up his body and hid it. Does that sound sane to you? Because it doesn't to me. But he does it in a way that's so clever and cunning. He lifts up the floorboards, puts the dead body pieces under there, and then the narrator lays the floorboards back down so it doesn't look like anyone's there. And then about 4 o'clock, the police come knocking at the door. They heard a scream, so the narrator invites the police in, and the narrator is so confident at this point. He's like, "Look around the house, I don't care." He takes them into the room where the old man was killed, and the narrator says, "Sit upon that very spot where the victim is actually buried." That's how confident he is. But then he starts hearing a ringing in his ears, and the ringing becomes more distinct, and he realizes it's not in his ears. The sound increases, and it's a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as the watch makes when enveloped in cotton. The line is repeated, so we know it's the heartbeat sound. It takes us back to that heartbeat. And the noise increases more and more and steadily increases, louder, louder, louder. That rhythmic beat again, boom, 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 louder, louder, louder. And at the end of the paragraph, just before he can't take it anymore, or she can't take it anymore, louder, 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 and it's just exploding upwards. The suspense is just building, and we're getting to this moment where eventually the narrator says, "You know what, I admit it, I can't take it anymore. I done it. I killed this old man. Tear up the floorboards. Here's the old man's body. Just, it's the beating of his hideous heart." That alliteration at the end, that hideous heart. So what do you think the heart could symbolize, the beating in his ears? If he continuously hears this beating, is it real? Is it like a ghost? Is this a ghost story we're hearing? Or do you think it's something else? Perhaps the beating that he hears is symbolic What do you think it could symbolise? The fact that the narrator's killed this person, and even after death keeps hearing this noise until the narrator can take it no longer and has to confess what they have done. What do you think that could symbolise? What do you think of the story? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for listening, guys.